Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and start our session. Who doesn't like a good murder mystery, right? We're all in tune to those books, and we seem to always be drawn to this mystery that's going to be resolved at the very end of the book. But Miss June is going to tell us lots more about this. We're going to go through the housekeeping rules just for a short second. As Ms. June is going through her slideshow and doing her presentation, we're going to hold our questions all the way until the end of the session. And then once the floor is open to your questions, I will allow you to unmute yourself. So in other words, all of you are not able to speak. So it's not going to be an open discussion. That would be a little bit more of a trouble to actually present. So we'll hold your questions and thoughts to the end of the session. Also, at the very end, I am going to launch a poll, which in other words is a very short survey to let us know what you think about this session. That would help us tremendously improve upon our Sound Learning's list of subjects, so to speak. At this point, we're going to allow Ms. June to introduce herself and start her session.
Hello, and thank you everyone for joining me here today. I'll be speaking this afternoon about crime fiction books and their authors, some of whom you may never have heard about. Books are subjective to a reader's state of mind, and that has to do with their needs, their capacity to suspend disbelief in some cases. These are all things that you should keep in mind when recommending a book or reading a book that someone else has recommended to you, because a lot will depend upon what frame of mind you're in. There have been times that I have put a book down and said, no, not today, and picked it up a week later and thoroughly enjoyed it. So don't always give up on a book right away. Some people do push through, some people continue to read and they still don't like it, and that's fair. We don't all like every book that we read, but sometimes you just need to put that book aside, walk away from it, and pick it up later. When we talk about genres, more than one can exist in the story. And the book itself can contain more than one of the genres that I'm speaking about today. I've chosen a selection of 5 genres with related authors and their books, and I hope they spark an interest in you because they're all very talented and the reason why I've chosen them. Also, as Aga mentioned, I will be ask you to stick around for the duration of this presentation because there will be a surprise at the end. And just before that surprise, Aga will open up the floor for questions and comments. Okay, here's a little bit about me. As you can see, I spend a lot of time in corporate communications for a major financial services company. I'm a graduate of the London School of Journalism. I have been a BoucherCon panelist. For you who are not familiar with BoucherCon, it's the world's largest mystery convention, and it's a convention because it is open up to fans and readers of crime fiction to attend. I've also been a Derringer judge. The Derringers are awarded by the Short Mystery Fiction Society, and they have different categories all within the shorter frame of crime fiction, from flash fiction, which is what I write, to short stories, I believe up to novellas, which may be 30,000 words. Also, a library sneak. For those of you who don't know me, I am an avid reader, and I have been since a young girl, probably between the years of 9 and 11. I used to sneak under the desk of the head librarian and move from the children's side of the library to where the real books were. And they would often find me in among the stacks reading Phyllis A. Whitney and Patricia Highsmith. You just can't keep a good reader back when they want to get into a good book. You'll also notice I put up, this is my website where I review recommended reading books, some of which I'm discussing with you today. And I'm happy to say Murder in Common is a FeedSpot top 100 crime novel blog, and I'm actually in the top 50. Okay, so today, the genres, as you can see, PIs, mysteries, thrillers, literary crime fiction, which may be something you have or have not read, or have read it and haven't realized that it's considered literary, and the police procedural. The first genre is private investigators. And the thing about private investigators is that they can be a diverse bucket of characters. So they can be licensed or unlicensed. They're sometimes a former cop or a civilian, and sometimes they're just the wrong or the righteous. All of these and more are the types of characters that make up the world of private investigators in crime fiction novels. The first writer I want to bring your attention to is John D. Patton. John Patton has written a very interesting series, but let me talk about him first. He was writing movie scripts at the age of 12, and he wrote fiction for his high school newspaper and wrote a few student films when at Boston University. That's where he received his film degree. When I asked him about writing, he said, "You can't believe how freaking hard it is. Writing a novel is a monumental freak show of difficulty. Writing another one after that is an exercise in masochism." I have a new tongue today. But the thing is that he really loves it. He says there's a dark joy in putting oneself through this much misery, especially when it's done. And he really likes when it's done. I asked him if he had a special skill set, and he says he makes a killer sausage pasta sauce, which I guess we should have asked him for the recipe for. And he says he can put away a Guinness faster than anyone that he knows. And that makes him a good guy in my books because I really enjoy Guinness. His series, I asked Josh what he had to say about his character over this series. This is what he has to say. Titus is just another in a long line of Marlowe imitations. Spencer was tougher and more upbeat. McGee fell in love too hard and too often. Titus is unhinged. He's torn apart by the death of his fiancée and unborn child. A screw has gone loose in his head. He comes to Miami full of rage and vengeance, but soon finds redemption in helping other people. And that is what transpires across the entire series. Book one, which I finished a while ago, I think this came out in 2018. It's about a missing daughter from a prominent family. And Titus, he's actually an ex-con, is working as a bartender. He's sort of drifting in Miami a bit. He's kind of just passing through and trying to figure out what he's going to do because he is there for vengeance. When he decides to take on this case, all of a sudden the family tries to pay him off, and that begins a whole series of events that culminate in mayhem at the end, of course. It's a good series. It's particularly because it takes place in Miami because we can sort of relate to that area. John McMahon. I don't know a lot about John, but I do know that I love his work. And the first book of his that I read is The Good Detective on the far right. He studied creative writing at the University of Arizona, and he's an ad agency creative director. He has actually won a Clio Award for one of his commercials, and he also wrote a commercial for Alfa Romeo that was featured in the Super Bowl some time ago. He lives in Southern California with his family and 2 rescue dogs. So again, someone else is pretty good in my books. Now I want to tell you about The Good Detective. This detective in this book is P.T. Marsh, and he was a rising star on the police force of Mason Falls, Georgia. But his wife and young son were killed in an accident, and since then, he's really lost his way. He's drinking too much, I think he's using a bit of drugs, and he can't see the difference between the line of smart moves and disastrous decisions. In this book, he actually ends up investigating a man he thinks he has killed. So it's quite a nice big twist at the very beginning of the book that keeps you reading. His latest book in the New York Times is a top 10 book. And what they said about him was one of those rare writers who seems to have sprung out of nowhere. And about his debut novel, it's pretty much perfect. And I think so. This lovely lady is Carol. She goes by the name of C.S. O'Kennedy, and she has a very interesting character in Candace Starr. Carol studied at the university in the 90s while a single parent of 2 children. Congrats to you. And she graduated with a distinction in sociology. After working as an IT analyst for decades, she wrote the award-winning Petra's Ghost, which is not part of this series, but it's actually considered a literary ghost story, and it has been exceptionally well received. Since 2018, you will notice Carol's email address is her website address is shekillslit.com, and she has hosted that site since 2018. It's a crime fiction book blog. It's good. She showcases writers in thrillers and noir genres. I asked her how Candace Starr came about, and she had submitted a book, a manuscript, to an agent who then said, well, it's really good writing, but it's not commercial enough, which apparently set her temper in force. And she said, well, if you think that's not blankety blank commercial enough, I'll give you one that is. And so Candace Starr became the result of what she called a creative tantrum. Candace Starr is a 6'3" former contract killer. She drinks too much. She's part of a very well-known crime family within the realm of this story. She's a pretty tough gal, and the first book, The Star Sting Scale, as the second one is not available to April, a woman from the city's elite approaches her. She's heard about Candace Starr, and she wants to hire Starr to kill her daughter's boyfriend because she believes he's a very negative influence on her daughter. And for Candace Starr, that's a no-go because the guy's only 17 and she never kills kids. Plus, she's retired. So as you can see, things will happen because the young man does end up dead in the end, and people actually believe that she has done it, including a police detective who gets on her case. So it's a lot of fun to read. I'm going to move on to mysteries. I find mysteries can be the very basis of who, how, who, what, where and why and the how of journalism, because they can be not formulaic, but they seem to pick out those specific things that they want to answer for you. Doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes they will leave you with an ambiguous ending, but for me, that's the basis of mystery. Now, this is Reed Farrell Coleman. I really like him a lot. I was speaking to him yesterday. I asked him, what would you like writers to know about you? And he thought, I can't really think of things. He said, although I did drive an oil fuel home delivery truck on and off for several years. And that's what my favorite uncle did in the winter because he was a game warden in the summer. So yeah, that's kind of something. A lot of authors have a lot of side gigs because it's very hard to make money writing books. Reed's a pretty prolific writer, as you can see. He has written, okay, let me talk about the book that the series that I want to talk to you first. It's called the Gus Murphy series. And Gus Murphy's a retired cop, and he drives the courtesy van that is the shuttle between the airport and a cheap hotel where he also lives. He's going through life in a fog. He's divorced now, and his son is dead. And his life for him is just a series of tasks. He just puts one foot in front of the other to get through the day. He's approached by an ex-con whose son was found beaten to death. And this man is telling Gus that there's really no investigation because, you know, the young man's son wasn't considered valuable. He was considered a lowlife. And no one's really looking hard for his murder. And that is the spark of interest that has Gus moving a bit forward into his life. As I mentioned, he's a prolific writer. The one that I have not read the Mo Prager series or the Gulliver Dowd series. However, when Robert B. Parker died, Reed picked up the mantle for 6 of the Jesse Stone books. And even if you haven't read the series, perhaps you've seen Tom Selleck starring in this very good series. I think it's completed now. When I asked him about writing about such an iconic character, Reed told me, it's weird how I began writing about someone else's character. And he actually felt detached from Jesse Stone. But how by the end of the 6 books that he wrote, he felt like Jesse Stone was his invention. And we sort of talked after that about, well, that's not just commitment, that's immersion. That's immersion into a character and bringing him life as he was created throughout those 6 books that he wrote. Reed does have a new series coming out. It's an unnamed series, but it will be about the character of Nicky Ryan, who was a decorated Afghan war hero and a New York Police Department detective with a unique way of doing things. And Reed says big things. He has a working title for the first book, and it's called Sleeping City. So I'm really looking forward to reading that when it comes out. Now, this is Melissa Yee, and there's a very specific reason why I've chosen to put up this picture of her, because as you may be able to tell by her white jacket, Melissa Yee is actually an emergency room physician who's practicing now. And she's a very busy lady right now. She is a human dynamo. I believe she's written a small play. She's acted. She just never stops. In addition to these crime fiction stories, she has written a werewolf book, which I think will be a continuing series. And as well, she writes books such as medical books, not teaching books, but if you have a bad back, it's a good one to pick up. If you suffer from dry eyes, those types of things that are relevant to people with specific conditions that they want help with. Now, if you notice in that picture, books are a little askew. And I think what happened here is when I contacted Melissa to let her know that I was going to be featuring her entire series, I asked her if she had a compilation of all 8 of these books. And she's like, I don't think I do, because Scorpion Scheme just came out a few months ago. So I think what she did is she lined up all her books on her hardwood floor and took a picture for us. That's the kind of gal Melissa Yee is. She is a very interesting writer, and I'll tell you a little bit about this series. Stockholm Syndrome. At the time, the physician in the book is called Dr. Hope Z, S-Z-E, and she's a resident in St. Joseph's Hospital. She's on call in the labor and delivery unit when a man pulls a gun and fires, and the whole unit of that hospital becomes hostage. Human Remains takes place after that, and there's a little PTSD going on with Dr. Hope Z in this series, but at the same time, it's a good change for her in her internship, and she's set for a rotation at a lab for stem cell research. She's never been to this lab, so she scopes it out the evening before her first work day, and she finds a body in the snow. It turns out to be a recent hire for the same project. So of course, she's off on another mystery to be solved. The underlying theme that carries through all of these books is that Dr. Hope Z is in love with 2 different men. There's no casual romance here. She deeply loves both of them. And as the series continues, they press her to make a decision for one or the other. And it's a little difficult for her. It's a charming part of the story that actually rings very true. She's a busy doctor working hard in different situations, and she loves 2 men. Stuart M. Kaminsky. This is one author I would love to have met. Stuart died sadly in 2009. But his books were released up to 2007. So there's really, there's nothing that would stop you from reading either of these books, because they're pretty much still relevant today, even though it's 14 years later. He was a film scholar, and he turned detective novelist who wrote prodigiously. He wrote more than 60 crime novels at 2 or more books a year, and they're so well done. It's unbelievable. He's widely known for his prodigious output, his complex characters, and rich evocations of time and place. All true. He was a member and a president of Mystery Writers of America, and he was named a Grand Master, which is the organization's highest honor. Other names you may recognize are Jeffrey Deaver, James Ellroy, and Sue Grafton. Now, the series that I have read is the Lou Finesca series. It's just such an enjoyable series. Lou Finesca, I believe he's a lawyer. He's suffering from depression. His wife was killed by a hit and run driver, and no one can figure out who did this. Because of this event and her death, he's gone into a deep depression. So what he does is one day he just gets in his car. He lives in Illinois, and he keeps driving until the car breaks down in Sarasota, Florida, at a Dairy Queen. And so what he does is he finds a little apartment not far from there, and he sets up shop as a process server. One of the funniest lines from this book, and I'll have to paraphrase it, I can't remember it exactly, is where the character Lou Finesca says, "Florida, the only place in the world where it's illegal to back out of your driveway without looking." The Toby Peters series takes place in the 1940s and is a hard-boiled detective series. The Inspector Rostkinoff series, it takes place in Moscow in Soviet era forward. I think it's from, there's 1991 forward, yes. Anyway, there's 16 books in that series and 24 books in the Toby Peters series. He's, as he was a film scholar, Stewart also wrote many books on that genre, that real life scenarios that were helpful to a lot of people. How's my time? Oh, I'm doing okay. Okay, this is Thrillers. And it's one of those books, you know it when you read it. You can't put it down. It's a real page turner. It's action packed. There's all sorts of exciting events. Sometimes many things happen at once. It's the kind of thing that is usually great to read at the beach or read when you want a break for something that's a bit deeper. It's just a brain refresh, as I call it. The first writer is Terrence McCauley. Terrence is, I believe it's in Brooklyn that he lives. He's a bit of a character. He's a voracious reader, as are many writers. Not only do they write, but they read other books of authors that they respect. If someone recommends an author that they haven't heard of and they discuss about why they like it, that's the kind of thing that he likes. He also enjoys his cigars. So every now and again, there'll be a picture of him with his latest smoke. Terrence says that he loves to blend research and travel into his books, and his work crosses several genres, including thrillers, crime noir novels, and westerns. So first, let me talk to you about his university series that I have at the top. And you'll notice that I have the Fairfax incident a little bit offset from the other 3 books. The university series is a clandestine agency that, a spy agency, I guess you would say. They gather intelligence, and they have been doing this since the days of the OSS. Now, for those of you who don't know, the OSS was the precursor to today's CIA. These books were written with an 80s theme. However, the Fairfax incident is written in the era of 1933 because it is the origin book of the university series. I highly recommend this series. It's absolutely a fantastic read. Now you'll notice the Rolfe Compton series of novels, and as you can see, they are westerns. And one of the reasons why I included Westerns and was perfect to feature Terrence is because I've heard from a lot of male readers that they don't write Westerns anymore. Well, they do. I cannot unfortunately tell you exactly when these books came out, but certainly within the last 20 years, maybe you have read them, but there are other authors who have written books from the Ralph Compton series of novels. There are different, there's one called Gunfighters. There's a different series of Western books that other writers have written for Ralph Compton's, I would assume, estate, or perhaps it was Berkeley Publishing that approached him to do this series. So maybe they hold the rights to this, this series. So again, a prolific writer, and these spy noir novels are quite the thrillers for you to read. This is Simon Maltman, and he's new to me. He has written, I believe, 5 other books, but this is the first one that I have read by him. I was approached by his publisher to participate in a blog tour. Blog tours aren't my favorite thing to do, but I will do them every now and again. This is quite a book. I like the little blurb they have here. It's like Patricia Highsmith developed a Belfast accent. That was written by the author Gerald Brennan. Excuse me. Simon started doing short stories about 5 years ago, so he's really new to the writing world. He then moved on to novels and novellas. Excuse me. He was a social worker manager and is now writing on the side while staying at home as a dad. This book takes place post-Troubles in Belfast. So he was asked about that, and I'm going to read what he wrote. I've always done my best to avoid the Troubles as much as possible, but is always a big, fat, noisy, unwanted elephant in the room. In this novel, I tried to create a thriller around characters who have been impacted in all kinds of specific ways by our shared past. I would describe it very much as a post-Troubles book and the specter of that has left behind it. And he really has done a remarkable job. To tell you a little bit about it, the main character's name is Pastor Tom, and he gave up his past life within the Troubles, working for his Uncle Paul. And I say Uncle Paul because Tom's father is dead, and Uncle Paul was Tom's father's partner. Pastor Tom, he got right with God, he got married, and he has a lovely, I think she's a 5-year-old daughter. He's living the good life, witnessing at this church. He preaches to a small but growing community, but he's got troubles. And those troubles are money troubles, because he has this grand vision of creating a community center for the youth of Belfast from the Protestant and Catholic sides, to bring them together to foster positive relationships and to generate harmony. The problem is money is running out, and he's getting close to having to put up more money to complete this project. So what does he do? He turns to Uncle Paul. And of course, nothing ever happens without strings attached, especially in the crime world. So it's a page turner and very enjoyable. Hallie Sutton. Hallie Sutton doesn't have her own personal webpage at this time, so I've just put her publisher's website information up there. This book is called The Lady Upstairs. And one of the things I want to mention about Hallie Sutton is this is her debut book. She has never released a book before. And what she did, she researched the noir of Los Angeles, where this novel takes place. And she immersed herself deeply in its criminal history to get an idea of what's going on. She wanted to understand the history, how Los Angeles perceives itself and how outsiders perceive Los Angeles. That specifically is one of the things that she wants to get at, and you can see that in her writing of the book. She also went on a fair amount of the noir crime tours in LA. She wanted to know about the myth making that surrounds the city, and for her that's endlessly fascinating. The Lady Upstairs, bringing out the worst in someone has its rewards, which is a fantastic tagline. Basically, these are 4 people that you know about. The Lady Upstairs, who supposedly no one knows, and 3 people who work for her. The 2 that are mainly featured are Jo, the main character, and her good friend, Lou. What they basically do is have a blackmailing scheme that they proceed with a con, a setup, basically that enables them to get they're basically sexual blackmailing pictures. And they set it up so well so that they can get the best pictures over a series of maybe 2 to 3 events, so that they can show that the guy that, hey, this wasn't just a one-time thing, that you've actually done this several times. Now, Jo, in this book, she has to recruit. They're always on the lookout for new recruits. And she always looks for beautiful young women, regardless, as long as they're age appropriate, to work the con. Unfortunately, her latest young lady is falling apart. The gentleman that they're blackmailing or will be blackmailing is a bit rough, and she's having a hard time dealing with it, and she can't sort that out. So she's starting to fall apart, which brings problems for Jo, for Lou, and the Lady Upstairs is not very happy about it. Police are also involved. There are payoffs to keep doing business. They run a hiring agency as a front, and sometimes they actually do place a few people, anything to just keep the con game going. It's a great debut. Literary crime fiction. I'm just going to take another sip of water. I promise. It's water, not vodka. Okay. Literary crime fiction. In-depth stories. They flow with wonderful prose that are very evocative of place and time. But at the same time, they don't lose you. They always maintain the tone and tension of the crime that has taken place within the book. So whether it's murder, kidnapping, whatever the scenario is, they seamlessly blend the plot and the characters of the book to give you quite a full experience. The first writer I want to speak to you about, hello, come on, flick. Uh-oh. I go. My mouse is not working. Let's see if I can swipe. No. Okay, let's try an arrow key. I think my screen is frozen. Well, that's interesting. Okay. Oh, there we go. All right, perfect. David Joy. Hooray. I can stop sweating now. David Joy is a wonderful writer. I have read, I believe, all 4 of his books. We're good. Yeah, it unfroze. Thank you, Aga. David Joy writes what he calls Appalachian noir. I believe in the South they call Appalachian, but someone who was born and raised in the province of New Brunswick, Canada, the Appalachians actually run through our province, and we called it Appalachians. But anyway, Appalachian noir by David Joy. David Joy has a bachelor's in literature and a master's in professional writing. He brings to life characters in these books that in a way are hopeless, but in a way have a view that maybe I can get out of this. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. there is a nice quote by David Joy that I would like to read to you. And I think it really tells you what kind of writer he is. David Joy says, "I think that artists are creatures of compulsion. You won't be able to help yourself. That feeling's not something you can just up and ignore. It feels like your life depends on it. It feels like if I don't get this story out of me, or this song out of me, or this painting out of me, I'm going to catch fire." And that's so true about his books. How about I'll talk to you about where All Light tends to go. So Jacob McNeely, he lives a life of self-imposed constraint, and that's because he feels like he's in a poisoned personal drama of parental tragedy. His father, Charlie, runs a meth ring and has the local police on his payroll, and his mother is a meth addict. Jacob believes that the story of his life is written and there will be no more edits to that script. He believes he's stuck, and that drugs and murder, because of his family, are his only future, and that includes his occupation. If I recall correctly, I don't believe he does drugs. I don't believe he has any interest in doing drugs, but perhaps part of his story is that he thinks maybe he will even degrade into that. But working for his father is what he does. Joy's writing is propulsive. Even though it's not a thriller, they are page turners in a way that go, I'm not sure what's going to happen on this next page with this character in this scenario that I know so much about. I highly recommend him. He lives off the land. He's not off the grid. I mean, he has Facebook and Twitter, but quite often he'll put up a picture of a dish that he's created, and it's all come from his woods and his garden. So it could be a deer, it could be wild boar. You're just not sure, but everything on his plate has come from something he has either harvested or killed. And that makes him very interesting. One thing I thought that was very sweet about him is that there was a picture. It turned out to be a mayfly, and it was when they come out quite quickly and disappear. At the time, I didn't realize what it was, and it was perched on a window, and I got a lovely shot of it. I posted that on Facebook, and I said, "Does anyone know what this is, this beautiful creature?" And he responded, telling me that it was a mayfly, all about them. And then we had a little conversation after that. But it was really nice of him to respond. I know he's busy. This next writer is Osama Zahanat Khan. This is one educated, brilliant lady. I can't even begin to tell you. She has won a Barry Award, which is a BoucherCon event for her books, and she's also won an Arthur Ellis Award, which is a Canadian award. Her series is absolutely fascinating. As you can see, perhaps a little bit at the top, the Washington Post calls it an exceptional series. She holds a PhD in international human rights law with a research specialization in military intervention and war crimes in the Balkans. You know, just a little light study. She has completed a Master's of Law and a BA in English Literature and Sociology. So, you know, she's got it all going on. She's been profiled on Public Radio International, interviewed by BBC World Service, and frequently appears on CBC Radio. She says she has moved frequently, traveled extensively, and written compulsively. And gosh, doesn't that reference back to David Joy, who says that writers are compulsive creatures? A quote from her: "One thing I love about writing, the minute you get into your research, the story starts to take shape." I wish it worked that way for me, but maybe it's something that I can think about. And if there are any aspiring writers or writers who are listening today, perhaps that's something that you can think about as well. The book I want to talk about is the first one. It's called The Unquiet Dead. And basically, a man is found dead at the base of the Scarborough Bluffs, which is quite a high precipice. They don't know if it's suicide, accident, or murder. What happens is that a team of RCMP specialists come in to the Toronto area to investigate this, because the gentleman who is dead has a background with ties to the former the war in former Yugoslavia. And they don't know if there are political implications, if it's a personal thing that, you know, he committed suicide, or perhaps personal reasons for why he possibly was murdered. Kirkus reviews, they can be quite brutal sometimes, but what they have to say about this book is Kahn's stunning debut is poignant, elegantly written, mystery laced with complex characters. All of that is true. It's Rachel Getty's father is a retired police sergeant from Toronto Police, I believe, who's abusive, and Eza Kataks is a Muslim man who is brought in specifically to deal with situations that may or may not involve an issue with Islam. It's more or less a political placement to manage issues, and as I mentioned, it may have something to do with the war in the former Yugoslavia. I'm going to have a little bit more water. Going to be wrapping up shortly. Okay. This is a delightful book. Ain't Nobody Nobody. Heather Harper Ellett was born and raised in Texas, and she is actually a therapist in private practice. She lives now in Dallas with her husband and son. One of the things that she has done in Dallas is she ran a creative writing workshop for homeless men and women there. Funny things that she said is being a licensed professional counselor is a skill set that lends itself nicely to working with writers. And there are a lot of people that will be able to identify with that. She said her quarantine diet has consisted of queso cheese and Topo Chico mineral water. I'm sure she's eaten more than that, but it's probably something when she's in a writing vein that she just goes on. And she loves distance biking, and hiking in New Mexico is her version of heaven. She also says she likes drawing bad cartoons and watching reruns of the Great British Bake Off. This is a very funny book. And yes, literature and humor do go hand in hand. It's very quirky. I thought I had a quote from her. But I guess I didn't. That speaks to what she's going for when she writes these books. All right, so let's talk about the book itself. Ain't Nobody Nobody. The main character is a disgraced sheriff, Mayhill. He's been fired from the job. And he's living his life very quietly because it's a small area where he lives, and you know, people talk. Everyone knows him. Everyone knows why he was fired, and it's pretty difficult for him. He knows he wasn't the best sheriff, but he tried hard. Sheriff Mayhill's best friend Van has committed suicide, and it's hit him very hard. He never saw anything coming. He never had any inkling that his friend would do this. And as a result, Mayhill decides to keep an eye on Van's family, and he does this via his binoculars because his house overlooks their home, but it's quite a distance away. So he just keeps an eye on the comings and goings in their yard and around their house. So one day he has his binoculars up, and suddenly he sees a body is draped over the fence. By the time he gets in his truck and gets down to their property, the body's gone, and people in the house, they're not talking. In fact, they don't even really know what he's talking about. So now begins a situation where he has to delve in to find out who died, how the body got there, and why they're not talking about it. It's a really funny and delightful story. The last is police procedurals. Police procedurals have a lot to do with the point of view. They are mainly from the point of view of the police detective, point of view, his or her point of view, her team's point of view, or perhaps the department's point of view, depending upon what the situation is. You can have a book with differing points of view. So you could have the police investigator's point of view and perhaps the killer's point of view. A lot of you may remember the book Gone Girl, where you had the husband's point of view and the wife's point of view running concurrently throughout the book. And you can get that within police procedurals as well. But mainly if you see a badge on the cover, flashing police lights, police tape, you know pretty well it's going to be a police procedural. Oh, I love these books. Okay, so even if you've never had an interest in Japan, you will love these books. Michael Pronko is an author who contacted me out of the blue a few years ago when his first book came out. He doesn't just write about Tokyo, he's been living there for 20 years. He's originally from Kansas. Go figure. Where does a boy from Kansas go? Tokyo. He actually taught for a few years in Beijing, however, where my husband and I also lived for a short period of time. He has a master's degree in education and a PhD in English. So again, hardly any education at all. He, as I mentioned, he taught in Beijing for 2 years. He has a jazz website. He's very much into the jazz scene in Tokyo. And as well, he helps run a conference on teaching literature, which he's very involved in. His quote for me was, "It feels good, though, to focus on 3 genres, music, memoir, and murder." Okay, let's talk about the series. The detective in this case is Hiroshi Shimizu. He's a statistics and finance detective. In other words, he's always in the back office working with international financial services companies or brokers, someone who has been involved in the scheme. He helps to ferret them out. It's all about numbers for him, and that's the kind of personality. And he's a deep delve kind of detective, and he's not out in the street solving murder crimes, except because his education in accounting was done in Boston. Hiroshi is very fluent in English. So when there is a situation in Tokyo that involves someone who is only English speaking, guess who they drag out? This poor numbers financial detective. He doesn't like it much, but of course he will do it. One part of the book that I like that runs throughout this series, there's a question that I have never asked myself before, and that question was, what do retired sumo wrestlers do? I mean, these are very large men, very strong men, and after their career in sumo wrestling is done, what do they do? Well, in the case of this series, 2 of them join the police department. It brings a lot to the story. It's under there, it's not prominent, but it's just enough to make you go, oh, right, yes. I'm going to talk to you about The Last Train. And does he have the moving blade there? Yes, he does. The Last Train. Okay, so what happens with this? An American businessman turns up dead. Hiroshi's mentor calls him to go to this grisly crime scene. He doesn't really want to go. This is the first time he's been pulled out to do this kind of thing, and he's not very happy for it. However, a glimpse from the security cameras when he investigates suggests that the killer is a woman, but in Japan, pretty unlikely. That's a very structured society, and he just can't quite see it. However, he quickly learns how close to homicide and suicide can appear in a city full of high-speed trains. It's just a step or a push away. So this is the introduction of Detective Hiroshi. I noticed he calls it the Detective Hiroshi Tokyo series, so he's going by his first name. It's a great introduction. Pronko's gift is that he immerses you in Tokyo, and it's done in a way that highlights the differences, but in a way that you can understand, or you kind of go, oh, that's really interesting. The Moving Blade is the second book, and this has to do with a top American diplomat who's killed. And behind him, he leaves a lifetime of successful Japan-American negotiations. But there's a missing manuscript, and there's boxes of research and a keynote speech that's very important. And there's a tangled web of relationships, of course, because there are a lot of moving pieces in a diplomatic relationship. What's fun is, of course, one of the sumo wrestlers actually helps Hiroshi with this case. Tokyo Traffic, which is profiled at the front there, will be, Michael says, yes, it will come out in May or June of this year. Otho Eskin. We've actually gone from talking about a character who's a diplomat to a real diplomat. Otho Eskin is a lawyer and former diplomat. He served in the US Army and in the United States Foreign Service. His track record is very long and historic, but one of the things I thought was quite interesting and would be fun to talk to him about is that he was involved in the negotiations for the International Space Station. He's also a successful playwright. He has several productions that were professionally produced in Washington, New York, and Europe. And Washington is actually where he lives with his wife. The Reflecting Pool is the first book in the Marco Zorn series. Detective Marco Zorn is what you'd call a sharp-dressed man. He loves the finer things in life. I believe he drives a Jaguar. His patch is Washington, D.C. And what happens is the body of a Secret Service agent is found in the reflecting pool. And in investigating this, he has roadblocks thrown up at every turn by the Secret Service, by the FBI, by his own department, by other agencies that he's not sure exactly who there are. It's a very interesting discovery of who this Secret Service agent was and why she's dead. Also, at the same time, an underlying theme in this book is there is a reopening of a murder investigation in Marco Zorn's hometown, and it's something that he's involved with, and I believe it's not as a police officer. I can't remember exactly. Headshot will come out sometime this year. The date I had was December, but hopefully it will shift and come out a bit sooner than that. It can happen quite a bit, I know, in books. Headshot is investigating the murder of an actress who is an old flame of Marco Zorn. And at the same time, he's assigned to protect the visiting Prime Minister of Montenegro. So there's always a lot of action within these books that make it quite interesting. And again, it's a police procedural. It's from the perspective of the detective in this situation. Now here's a delightful Irish writer by the name of Olivia Kiernan. I contacted her a few days ago to talk about her books, how much I enjoyed them, and about her writing story. And basically, as she says, she grew up in a land of people who are known storytellers, so she couldn't help but be a writer because it's part of her culture. What she says is unusual is that when she went to university, she studied the sciences. So maybe a nice balance of left and right brain there. She's actually a chiropractor, and she started her own business, which gave her the opportunity to do a part-time master's in creative writing, and as well to write her books around her chiropractic hours. And that for her is an absolute dream come true. Yeah, it's a rare opportunity when someone has the ability to do that. She's actually writing the fourth book in the series. She didn't mention when it's coming out, but I think if I had given a look online, I might have been able to find it. The character in these books is called Frankie Sheehan. And in Too Close to Breathe, which is the debut book of the series, she's back on the job. She was badly injured by a killer from a previous case. And when she gets back to work, she isn't 100% physically, but she doesn't want pity from anyone. She's back on the job. She's actually an inspector, I believe, in this book. So she has a team underneath her, and they respect her. They work with her. They respect how she treats them and how she deals with the crimes she's been assigned. But they're a little concerned that there may be some PTSD as a leftover of the injuries she suffered at the hand of this killer. The Killer in Me. I don't know much about this book because I think I skipped that one and skipped to If Looks Could Kill just as a matter of necessity. But book 2, The Killer in Me, is billed as a dark, irresistible cocktail of secrets, murder, and family. And we all know when you get involved in family, there's a lot of complexities that will go on in this. Again, it's a police procedural from the point of view of the detective. Okay, where to find new authors? I get this a lot. And the first thing I will say to you about that is that go outside of your comfort zone. Start reading authors from different countries. At first, of course, I read anything and everything, but I noticed as the years progressed, I was reading a lot of American authors, which is great. There are a lot of very fine American authors, but the reason why is because they were the ones getting all the press. So yes, you sort of follow the recommendations, and then one day you realize, oh, this author wrote this way because of this Australian author. That leads you to that author, and from there, because that author, he liked this Spanish author, and all of a sudden you're hopping around the world and looking for various crime fiction books from different countries. I was asked in the last session I did 2 years ago if anything out of Russia. I have not been able to find anything. There are books that are written about it, but from Russian authors, I don't see anything that's coming out. It's something that I want to do a little investigation on. So you can contact me about that later if you have an interest in authors from Russia. I'll be putting up my email address for that. Another place to find crime fiction authors, go to the Crime Fiction Award website. So Crime Writers of America, of Canada, Crime Writers Association, which is the UK, and the Australian Crime Writers Association, just to name some of the top 4. What I have found is that when you read some of the books that are award winners or runners-up or even the nominees list, you don't always like them. But you're not the judge of that book. You are of that competition. You are only the judge of the book in front of you, and your thoughts and words on that are as valid as anyone else's. But there have been books that I've read that I thought, I'm surprised that was nominated, or I'm surprised that one won. Again, it's a matter of reader's choice, reader's taste. Something we see a lot of now, crime fiction podcasts. I don't have a lot of time to listen to these, mainly because if I'm listening to a book, it's a crime fiction book that I've got from audible.com, and I'm going to be writing about it. So my time is spent on things that I will be writing about. So we have Writer's Type, Point Blank Podcast, and Writer's Detective. All of these offer something different, and all of them seem to be interesting. You can try these 3. You can just Google crime fiction podcasts, and there's a wealth that will come up. Some are funny, some are very serious. It just depends upon who the hosts are and what they're trying to get across. Some interview the authors, which is always, for me, is always more interesting because you get all the little tidbits about why they wrote this book, how they wrote this book, and perhaps what they're going to do next. These are favorite websites of mine. Crimereads.com, very broad website that will give you many genres. They do deep delves into different authors, into different genres. They go across the board on authors from everywhere. Mr. Tribune not only does books, but it also does movies and TV shows. So you can get your full shot of crime fiction at Mr. Tribune. It's a very very good website, and you can subscribe to these websites. Now, Goodreads.com is like significantly different from these other two websites. Goodreads is a site where book reviewers who receive books in advance, either an advanced review copy, which is called an ARC, A-R-C, which is a hard copy, or a digital review copy, which is called a DRC. And what happens is bloggers like I and many others will receive these copies in advance of a book's release, and they're reviewed on this site. So if you have a favorite author and you haven't run across anything right now that you think they're coming out with, you can go to goodreads.com. You can just put that author's name in the search box, and the reviews will come up, and then you'll see if there's anything new, because these are all books who have not yet been published. It's an interesting resource for you. This is my email address. So if you have any questions that you would just like to email me about, if you want to drop a comment, I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. If you want a list of the authors that I have spoken to you about today, I can send that to you if you'd like to email me for that. One more thing before I shift over to our surprise. Kevin, I hope you're listening. I want to thank the Pelican Sound Learning team for everything they do for the members of this community, and for reaching out to me to do this presentation again. I very much appreciate the opportunity. So thank you very much to the Pelican Sound Learning team. Kevin, are you there? I don't hear him.
Ms. June, he may have to raise hand. I will be happy to allow him to speak.
Okay, Kevin, if you will raise your right hand, you raise your hand so that Aga can let you in.
Oh, I see it.
You see it? Okay.
Yep. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted,
You
Kevin.
are.
All right.
All right. There you are, looking very good too. So Kevin is the writer of the Mike Stoneman thriller series. And again, this is I guess you would say it's a police procedural.
I'd say so, yes.
I'd say so. Just to give you a little introduction, Kevin is from Windsor, New Jersey, and is a graduate of Columbia College and Boston University School of Law. And you also play in tournament poker.
One of my hobbies.
One of your hobbies. We have a friend whose son is very good in tournament poker. All right, Mike, why don't you, sorry, Kevin, why don't you tell us about the Mike Stoneman series?
Well, Mike Stoneman is a New York City homicide detective. And the first book in the series, Righteous Assassin, happens to be about a serial killer case that he is investigating. But he's just about to turn 50. He's been around the department for a while. He's paired up with a younger Black detective named Jason Dixon. And the books really are mostly about the relationship between Mike and Jason, the budding romance between Mike and the county medical examiner, Michelle McNeil, and their adventures and their relationships. And it's going to be a 5-book series. 3 are done. 1 is in production, and 1 really left still to write.
Okay, so you're getting there.
Getting there.
Yes. So what we will be doing today, Kevin has very generously offered the first 3 books in this series to one of you. When the reservations closed for this presentation, I did a random draw, and it's Jerry Wilker. I believe, is the gentleman who won the 3-book series. So we will be in touch with you, Jerry, to see how you would like to receive this book. I think, Kevin, you are offering hard copies, audible books, audio books, or digital books for a Kindle or Nook, if I'm correct on that.
Absolutely. Whatever format the winner wants them in, I will be more than happy to provide.
Okay. Aga, if you could unmute everyone, we'll open the floor up to any questions for Kevin or a
Actually,
question.
I don't have that ability, but if somebody raises hand, I'm happy to do
Okay,
it right
I'm sorry,
away.
that's
So
okay.
I'll be looking for raised hands. So this is the time to ask questions, folks.
One at a time. If anyone has any questions for Kevin or me on the presentation that we've done today, on any of the authors or the books themselves, happy to receive them.
Kay Howard, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah, June, what exactly is flash fiction that you like?
Yeah, I knew you were going to do this to me.
Did you?
All right. As Kay knows, I am a writer of flash fiction. And basically, flash fiction is a scenario that takes place generally is written in 750 to 1,200 words. They can be fewer, there can be 300 words. I've seen them in 100 words. I've seen them in 1,500 words. It depends upon the publisher who wants you to write. So I have written 3 flash fiction stories that have been featured in Punk Noir magazine, Akashic Books, Mondays Are Murder feature, and the Flash Fiction Press. And if you want to read those, if you go to my website, murderincommon.com, and go to the About page, just page down a little bit, and you will see links to those 3 stories. I do warn you, they are not for the faint of heart.
Marianne, I'm going to let you unmute yourself. Marianne, go ahead and unmute yourself.
If you need some filler, June, I can give you a little background on
Okay.
how the
Thank
Mike
you.
Stoneman series came to be. I was actually in the middle of writing a very serious political drama, another book that I have out called The Legacy of One. But I was asked to write a story for a short story writing competition, talking about flash fiction. It was for the New Jersey Corporate Counsel Association. I'm a lawyer, and the competition only was open to books that were about crime or law. And so I figured I would take a break from what I was writing and wrote a short story. And the short story called Fool Me Twice was where Mike Stoneman first came into existence in print. That short story is available free on Amazon or on my website. So anybody who wants to pick up that for free to get a little taste of Mike Stoneman, that was a story that had to be 5,000 words or less. And that was how I got into writing about this particular character. And then years later, when I was finally finished with the other book, I decided to make that into a full novel.
That happens fairly often. I've read several series where the character actually started off as a short story and been expanded upon. There's a Canadian writer, Owen Lockinen, who writes the Professional series, and his first book was supposed to be a standalone, but it was so well enjoyed that he had to extrapolate from the point of view of the crime people within this book to the investigating officers, and that's how the story took off. So it was really quite an interesting thing to see that movement, not only from different characters, but characters that evolved as part of a shorter work of fiction.
Absolutely.
Marianne, I think you're unmuted right now, so go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, well, good. I just wanted to say thank you to June Lorraine and to Kevin. This is a great presentation. I have been familiar with the term and the groups, Mystery Writers of America. And I know you reference regularly crime writer associations. Is there a hard and fast distinction between these 2 genres, or is it, just a matter of taste and preference?
I think, if I understand your question correctly, crime fiction is the umbrella that I use to describe all books that have a crime of some sort that take place. Mystery Writers of America is a great organization. I mentioned that Stuart Kaminsky was a grand master of that organization. And there are no hard and fast rules, not when you're a writer. Kevin, you agree with that?
Yes, I'm waiting one day to be allowed admittance to the Mystery Writers Association. You have to meet certain standards for having sold a certain amount of books in a certain number of different platforms, but I'm hoping to get there one day.
Okay, yes, I know.
Looking forward to reading your books, Kevin. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Karen is the next person to ask a question.
Thank you, June. This was great. I really appreciate your
Thank you.
expertise. I had one question for you and one question for Kevin. For June, what did you mean by a blog tour? People have asked you to do a blog tour.
Okay. Yes, and I should have explained that. So thank you for asking, Karen. A blog tour is when the publisher or an author themselves will approach various people who write about books, in this case, crime fiction books. And they will do an aggregate of perhaps 10 days or a week, and they will do each day, a blogger will post their review of a book or a series of books. And it's advertised that way or publicized that way, in that you can read different bloggers' perspective through the review of that book. And it's amazing how they can vary. I never work with the synopsis of a book. I prefer, it's a very short form writing that I do, because I like to give the flavor of book, what I picked up from a book specifically. And that's what readers will get when they tap into a book blog tour. They will get the perspective of, say, 5 to 10 different reviewers who may all have something different to say about one book.
Okay, thank you. And Kevin, how long does it take you to write a novel? What is your process with research, and do you do it 5 hours a day, 4 hours a day?
Well, that's a great question. I have a day job, so I write in the evenings and on the weekends. And back in the before times, I used to travel quite a bit, so I would do writing on airplanes and trains and whatnot, which was always a good time to get to hotel rooms. Just on this series, each book becomes a little easier and a little quicker, just because I'm dealing with a cast of characters that's a little more well developed, and I'm adding new characters that come in for each book that haven't been in previous books, but the core characters are all there. So it took me about 2 years from start to finish to write the first book in the series. Righteous Assassin was published in December of 2018, but then it only took a year to get book 2 out. That was published in December of 2019. And then Lethal Voyage, the third book, was also published a little less than a year after Deadly Enterprise. I will say that with COVID, since I'm not traveling at all and not going out to movies, not going to concerts, not doing a lot of socializing, book 4 is in beta reader stage right now, and it's going to my editor next week. So book 4 in the series, called Fatal Infraction, will be out probably by June of this year. So it's getting a little quicker each book.
Well, good, thank you. I look forward to reading them.
I have a question for Kevin, and I feel like you may have answered that question just a bit. This comes from Mr. Collins, and the question is, when you have a plan for 5 books or 3 or 6 series, how deeply are the plots developed, and how do you decide?
Great question.
Thanks. Well, in this case, there's a character plot that really goes from the very beginning of Righteous Assassin through the end of what I have scoped out as the 5th book in the series. And it's really that the character plot is an ongoing subplot to all the books. So in each book, there's a main story. There's a crime, there's a murder, My main character is a homicide investigator, so there's always going to be a murder. And so each book is a standalone story about that particular investigation. But there's an underlying development of the character relationships that goes from book 1 through until the end of book 5. And that is the story arc that I have all planned out. I know what the last scene of the last book is going to be. That's ready to go, but I still need to finish the main plot of book 5. I know where it's going to happen. I know mostly what's going to happen. Still doing a little research, but the 5-book series is really the character arc, not the story arc of each book.
Thank you. And Mr. Backrack has raised his hand. We're going to go ahead and allow him to speak right now.
Kevin, thank you for being with us. If you don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the business end of things. Self-publishing versus trying to find a publisher. I noticed your Lethal Voyage, at least, is published by Kindle Direct. Is that considered self-publishing? Or
Yes, all of these are self-published through Amazon, through Kindle Direct Publishing, and it's would I have preferred to have a traditional publisher back at the beginning? Probably yes, but it has been a really interesting process for me to be self-published and to have a little more control over the process and not have to worry so much about submitting things to the editor at the publishing company. But listen, I think all authors would ultimately prefer to be on the HarperCollins list or the Random House, and you get a lot of support and you probably make a lot more money.
so that's just because of the marketing?
Yeah, marketing books is the hard part. I mean, writing is a joy to me. Writing is fun. Marketing is a chore. Getting advertising out and getting marketing out and trying to promote the books by yourself as an independent author is hard. It is really hard. Even things like audiobooks. I narrated my own books for audiobook through ACX, which is Amazon's audiobook from Audible's publishing process. And that was interesting. I made a few mistakes along the way. It would have been much better for me to hire a professional narrator and a professional engineer, but the cost of that is just not going to make it for me based on the number of audiobooks I expect that I'm probably going to sell in the first 2, 3, 4 years of their existence. So I did it myself, and I enjoyed it, and I think they're pretty good. The second 2 are better than the first one. I will admit that. But that you do what you have to do when you're self-published.
Yes, and certainly Kevin is not the only successful author that has done their own self-publication. There are many of them. In fact, some of them actually even start their own small publishing companies. I think Michael Pronko is one of them, from the Tokyo series. And like Kevin, like Michael Pronko, is an author who reached out to me out of the blue, came across my website and reached out to me to see if I would be interested in reviewing his latest book.
Marianne has another question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it's more of a comment. I just wanted to say, I think the term independent publishing has taken hold much more strongly in the last decade or so over self-published. There are articles in all the writing magazines and at conferences and all about the business strategies and so forth of I think what we're now calling indie writers or indie publishers. I just would like Kevin's comment on that.
Kevin? Oh my goodness, did I just mute you?
I got a message on my screen that I had been muted. So
I apologize. My screen is scrolling back and forth and I just don't know what I'm doing half of the time. No, I take it back.
I love the term independent publisher, independently published. That sounds a lot better than self-published.
Yeah.
And really the first book I ever wrote was back in the late 90s. And that one really was self-published in the sense that I had to find one of the publishing houses out there. It was called Ex Libris, which I think they still exist in some form.
Yes,
And they were happy to take $2,000 and print, you know, a 500 copies of my book and give them to me and say, here's your book. Now it's up to you to sell them. That was not a great process. Now with Amazon being independently published is a lot easier.
yes.
Yes, absolutely.
I think we probably can remember back in the day when it was called vanity publishing. Do you remember that? Yeah, not a very attractive term, but yes. But it certainly has come a long way. And as I mentioned before, there are a lot of very successful authors who have, some of whom have actually moved from independent publishing to a big name publisher. So there's the opportunity to earn more money. It's actually very hard to earn money writing books. Do you remember, Kevin, are you familiar with Adrian McKenzie's books?
I don't think so.
Yeah, he wrote, he's an Irish writer, and he wrote 2 wonderful series that I've read. Sean Duffy series and Michael Forsyth series. Very incredibly well-written books. However, the poor man was starving half to death. He couldn't meet his mortgage. He was driving for Uber. I think his family was about ready to give up on him, and he ended up writing a thriller called The Chain. I think it's going to be made into a movie. So it was, you know, you can write and write and write, and then all of a sudden, one of your books gets on the desk of the right person, and off you go.
Yeah, that's the dream, is that you have something that goes viral somehow and people start noticing it. And I tell you, I read a lot of independent, other independent writers. I'm in a couple of different groups of independent writers, and some of the stuff is just terrific. And you just wonder, what does it take for somebody to get noticed and to get that stuff in front of thousands of people instead of dozens?
Yes, I think the fact that crime fiction books alone are, in a new book comes out, there's tens of thousands every year from around the world of crime fiction books alone that are published. So it's very hard to get a book noticed.
We would like to invite some more questions. In the meantime, I wanted to remind you that I have shared with you poll, and we would love for you to give us your feedback on today's session. It doesn't take more than 30 seconds, but Ms. Karen will be happy to see the results. Ms. Karen is on the Sun Learnings Committee, and she's in charge of all the surveys.
Meantime, I'll put up my email address again, if in case someone hasn't had a chance to note it. And as I had mentioned before, if you would like to receive a list of the authors that I've talked about today, I'm happy to send that to you. So you can just send me a quick note.
There's someone that called himself attendees. And go ahead, ask a question if you don't mind.
This is Jerry Wilker's wife.
Oh, hello.
Oh, right.
And I want to thank you for what a surprise it was, Kevin, to me. And my husband's playing golf right now, but
Okay.
he's going to watch later. And it's been just wonderful. I love mysteries, so of all kinds. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks so much. And we'll be in touch. So he can decide which type of, which format that he would like to receive the books in.
Well, I'm sure it won't be digital.
Okay. That's okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You got hard copies. That's totally fine.
Oh, my. Thank you.
They're easier to autograph.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
They'll be prime on my shelf.
All right. That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
I don't see any more hands being risen. We thank you so much for presenting today, the both of you.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
Okay.
Very welcome.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Kevin, for answering questions and talking about your series. And I will be in touch with you.
Terrific.
Fabulous.
Okay.
Don't forget about the poll, everyone.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.